So I'm going to be talking about, when I wrote this title, I actually hadn't done the talk yet, so it's a little bit harsh. Yeah, just ignore that for now. But basically what I want to talk about is how you don't have to be entirely right to actually influence policy, and in fact that's not really a determinant of how successful you are in influencing policy. So I'm going to talk about vaccination, and I'm going to talk about media as well a little bit. So that guy is called Edward Jenner. He pioneered the smallpox vaccine in the 1700s, and he's a wonderful and amazing man. He used this thing called cowpox, which is apparently real, to inoculate people against smallpox. So he saved a shitload of lives. He can fly. He has amazing superhuman strength, and yeah, basically he's a wonderful man. You should love him. He died a while ago, but I suspect that he was reborn as British comedian David Mitchell. And now Edward Jenner spends his time doing like literate and hilarious short YouTube clips. For money. Now, some of the first people to oppose vaccination were kind of these like religious zealots. And there's this guy called Edmund Massey. In 1772, Edmund Massey thought that basically when you were inoculating someone, you were literally injecting the devil into them. And I thought that was really interesting, that you could basically have the devil in like liquid form. And it raises a whole bunch of really interesting questions, like what can you do with that? Can you freeze him, like make him into ice cubes, put him in cereal? Or like, can you have like a devil milkshake? And I think you can. If anyone's ever had wheatgrass juice, it's freaking disgusting. So I'm just going to read out a few things that some people said about vaccination when it first sort of became common practice. Smallpox is a judgment of God on the sins of the people, and to avert smallpox is to provoke him more. Inoculation is an encroachment on the prerogatives of Jehovah, whose right it is to wound and smite. Well, that was a little harsh. I couldn't find a photo of Edmund Massey, but that's somebody called Edmund, so you can just imagine that's him. With his trumpet. Okay, so since vaccination was introduced basically a few centuries ago, it's been like the most successful public health measure ever. It's amazing, and smallpox has just been completely eradicated. And there's a huge number of advantages. That's from the World Health Organization website. If you guys did a paper on the full sort of gamut of advantages of vaccination, some of them are a little, I don't know. Yeah. So source drying. I wasn't going to, but I will explain source drying a bit later on, because I've just realized how confusing that is. To anyone who doesn't know what source drying is. Promoting peace, I don't know. You could probably make that link, but I'm going to talk a little bit about herd immunity, because it sort of comes into play when you're thinking about policy and health policy in particular. So vaccination doesn't just protect against those who are vaccinated. There's this thing called herd immunity that also kind of works to protect the unvaccinated, which is kind of interesting. I mean, how could that possibly be, right? I mean, if you're unvaccinated, you're going to get it. If you're vaccinated, then you won't get it. But herd immunity works to alter how the disease is transmitted, not just the uptake of the disease itself. So basically, lobbying against vaccination and trying to affect policy is more dangerous than you might think. So there's just a quick video I've got. There's a great documentary a few months ago that some of you might have watched. I know at least one of you has watched it, called Jabbed. Love, Fear and Vaccines, I think is the full title. And it's just a quick clip from it.
If the vaccination rates are low, it's not a question of if there will be people infected, but rather how many and how badly.
more people around me who are protected, the less likely I am to bump into somebody who actually has the disease. And you can think of this as these sort of concentric circles of people. And the less the disease exists in my circle or the next circle or the next circle, the safer I am. Now, I can't control what other people do, but what I do doesn't just affect me. The same set of circles exists for everybody. So the only way to be truly certain that we will not get sick is to have all of the circles, from my family to my community to my country to the world, such that there is no disease. We've done it once with smallpox.
Yes, and that's why you should always be vaccinated before you go to football in London. Okay, so right, speaking of London, there's a guy called Andrew Wakefield. Has anyone actually heard of Andrew Wakefield? A few of you? Okay. Just seeing how much I can make up about him. He's a British scientist who he published some research in 1998 that purportedly links vaccines with autism. And I mean, the research was discredited. I sort of knew before I was researching this that, he'd been found guilty of fraud, but something I didn't know is that basically during his research, he was found guilty on 12 counts of abusing developmentally challenged children, which, I mean, that's just bonkers. And so that didn't put a dent in the anti-vaccination movement. In fact, Wakefield's research really boosted it. And once it was kind of out there, it was really, really hard to counter, which I think is an interesting point that I won't be talking about. Moving on to a more contemporary group. Actually, sorry, one more thing. Can anyone see? It says stifle uncomfy science.
Yes. Also, Jack, what does that mean?
I don't know. But it's a really polite protest sign. We've sort of talking about protest before. That's like the nicest. Okay. So a few more of you might have heard of Meryl Dorey and the anti-vaccination lobby, because they've been in the media a fair amount this year. The Australian Vaccination Network. Just out of curiosity, who's sort of seen them in like the newspapers and stuff like that? You guys come across them? Yeah. So they're led by this lady called Meryl Dorey, and she's sort of taken a bit of a backseat recently, and there's another guy called Greg Beattie. But they're really effective campaigners, and they're good at convincing individuals, on the individual scale, that vaccination is potentially harmful. And they use a lot of really interesting tactics that I will also not be going into. What I'm going to talk about is kind of the sort of the scarce but important ripples that they make in the political world. There's a politician in South Australia called Anne Bressington. You may not have heard of her. She's not really in the public eye very much, but she was elected in 2006. She's an independent member of the Legislative Council, which means she does have a bit of sway. And in reference to something Bill Gates tweeted in February, February this year, she tweeted that she thought vaccines are a form of population control, along with the entire corporation of Monsanto. Which, I mean, yeah, they're evil, but I'm not sure they're trying to control the population. So, I think Anne Bressington is sort of a good example of, like, it's not really massively prevalent in politics, but there are politicians out there who are saying stuff as profoundly bonkers as vaccines are a form of population control. So we'll just go to America. I was so angry when I was watching this video, like I nearly gave birth, but like it's just...
To what?
to the rage baby, okay. This is amazing.
Governor Perry mandating vaccinations for HPV to prevent infections that could cause cervical cancer for girls as young as 12. You not only question the policy, but you question the motivation behind it, suggesting rather strongly that this could have been an attempt to appease a big drug company, Merck.
The governor chose by himself unilaterally to sign an executive order and put through the requirement that all innocent little 12-year-old girls or 11-year-old girls in the state of Texas would be forced by the government to take an injection of what could potentially be a very dangerous drug.
So
and after the debate last night,
do you feel he placed the health and safety of young girls in the state of Texas behind or below the need for campaign funds?
well, I will tell you that I had a mother last night come up to me here in Tampa, Florida, after the debate. She told me that her little daughter took that vaccine, that injection, and she suffered from mental retardation thereafter. It can have very dangerous side effects. The mother was crying when she came up to me last night. I didn't know who she was before the debate.
Right. Okay. So.
She's very vaccinated.
So. There's a few. I think there's a few really important things that we can sort of take away from what she said there. I'll only focus on one though. I mean, which is simply that she was talking about policy there, and she was talking about Rick Perry's policy to push through. I think it was compulsory vaccination for early high school girls. I can't remember what state it was. Texas, yes, thanks. And so she's against it. And why is she against it? What's the reason? Is it because she's been lobbied by an anti-vaccination group, or is it because one individual told her that vaccines cause mental retardation? I don't know, but I still think it's really interesting to see that she was on television saying this, and she kind of tried to retract it a bit later on by saying, well, I'm not a scientist, but this mother came up to me and she just went straight back to the anecdote about the lady in tears. So it kind of shows you how important that anecdotes are compared to Rick Perry, who was actually trying to, I think, push it through for good reasons. So are lobby groups the only groups capable of kind of affecting policy on this? I don't think so. I think they're actually not as effective as when I originally set out to do this, I kind of expected more evidence of their efficacy, and they're not. So I think one of the most effective campaigns around vaccination has been a campaign recently run by the Daily Telegraph. Did you guys actually, just again, question, did you guys come across this in the media? No jab, no play, you might have heard that phrase a fair bit in the media. I saw that it wasn't just on the Daily Telegraph, it was on morning shows, it was on evening news and stuff like that. And I thought it was really, really interesting, and I followed this very closely when it happened. So the Daily Telegraph came up with and pushed this campaign themselves. It was their brainchild. They were very, very proud of it. When you read all the articles, which I'll post somewhere, if you guys are interested, they use phrases like "we," "I." The Daily Telegraph has started this campaign. It's us. I thought that was all really interesting. It was very, very successful. It got a lot of public support, but it also they actually also got legislation through. And that quote there said. Yeah, so that just explains what the legislation was. So it worked. A newspaper decided to alter health policy. Wasn't necessarily on a whim, but it was obviously, there's no real clues as to how it originated. So what we didn't really see much of, though, was criticism about the policy itself. So, two researchers from Sydney University, Julie Leask and Willaby, wrote some, I think, pretty good opinion pieces on some ways that it might go wrong. And these don't necessarily negate the policy, but they weren't really mentioned in the campaign, which I think is something really important to think about. So, what they were talking about, like how it kind of divides people, you know, vaccinated, unvaccinated parents, they're kind of fighting like those adorable kittens are doing. But one thing I found really, really important is that is the possibility that the campaign might result in groups of like children going to certain schools that are all unvaccinated, and that has a big consequence for herd immunity. It's because they're just all in one spot, and I would have liked at least to see some discussion about this during the Daily Telegraph's campaign, and there's none. This is amazing. So basically, in the legislation, there's a religious exemption. So if you have any religious reasons for not vaccinating your children, you don't have to. So 2008, they registered a church called the Church of Conscious Living, and vaccine objectors, or vaccine refusers, as they're now known, can sign up to this church and just exempt their children from being vaccinated, and they can still go to childcare centres. I just thought that was amazing. Daily Telegraph's response to that is they started to delineate between real religions and sham religions. So they nominated a whole bunch of religions that they defined as real. I thought that was quite funny as well. Which there's a whole lot of stuff you could talk about that, but I won't go into it. Oh yeah, actually one other really important point. The Daily Telegraph does not have a good track record when it comes to publishing articles about vaccination, and I didn't see this anywhere, but I collated all these articles on, these are headlines that were published in the Daily Telegraph, and like I won't go through them, but they're really sort of...
So, HPV vaccine linked to infertility needs to be tested, says
Miranda Devine.
Expert.
Not really, yeah. And they're not really, you know, big science people either. So these are some articles. I threw a wind turbine thing in there. These are some articles that just aren't very scientific at all, and there are just some amazing headlines in there.
They always have great pictures of concerned parents.
Yeah, they do, and that's, yeah, we can talk about that later. So just some things to think about. Is it right for the Daily Telegraph to be running a campaign on health policy? As we saw earlier this week, they do, like, they are campaigners, like they have no hesitation in taking a side, so is that good, is that bad? Is the legislation itself a good policy? That's something else to think about. That's Steve Hambleton, who's the head of the Australian Medical Association, and he fully supported it. And he's not exactly, you know, ignorant about this sort of stuff. So that's just something else to think about. I mean, this guy who knows immunology quite well fully supported the Daily Telegraph's campaign. Prince Charles loves homeopathy. Prince Charles really loves homeopathy, and he's like affected. You know, like he's sort of tried to affect policy in Britain. I didn't talk about it at all, but I just love this picture, so I had to put it in there. And that's it. Thank you.